a bustling metropolis with over 100,000 inhabitants, grand temples reaching toward the heavens, marketplaces filled with exotic goods from distant lands, and then silence. Streets that once echoed with children's laughter now whisper only with the wind. Palaces where kings once ruled are now home to nothing but shadows and dust. This isn't science fiction. This is the haunting reality of lost civilizations, societies that reached incredible heights of achievement, only to vanish so completely that we're still piecing together the fragments of their stories thousands of years later. I'm about to take you on a journey through three of history's most chilling mysteries, civilizational collapses so complete, so sudden, that they've baffled archaeologists and historians for generations. The Harappan people of the Indus Valley, master urban planners who built the world's first modern cities, complete with sewage systems that wouldn't be seen again for 3,000 years. And the Bronze Age civilizations, interconnected societies that created the world's first global economy, only to watch it all burn in what historians call humanity's First World War. But these aren't just stories from a distant past. They're mirrors reflecting our own civilization's vulnerabilities, warning signs written in stone and clay that we ignore at our own peril. Let's begin our journey in the steaming jungles of Mesoamerica, where one of humanity's most sophisticated civilizations carved their legacy in stone and starlight. The Maya weren't just one civilization. They were a collection of city-states that shared a common culture, language, and an obsession with time that bordered on the mystical. While Europe was still struggling through the Dark Ages, Maya astronomers were calculating the length of the solar year to within minutes of modern accuracy. They developed the concept of zero independently, created a writing system more complex than Egyptian hieroglyphs, and built cities that housed hundreds of thousands of people. Tikal, Palenque, Copan, these weren't just cities, they were centers of learning that rivaled anything in the ancient world. Maya society was incredibly complex, ruled by god-kings who claimed to speak directly with the cosmos, supported by a sophisticated class of priests, merchants, and artisans. They practiced intensive agriculture, transforming swamplands into productive farms through a system of raised fields and canals that could feed millions. But then, between 800 and 900 CE, this incredible civilization began to unravel. It didn't happen overnight. The collapse was a slow-motion catastrophe that unfolded over several generations. The most haunting evidence comes from the long count calendar, the Maya's sophisticated system for tracking deep time. The last long count date, recorded in the central Maya region, was carved in 909 CE at a site called Tonina. After that, silence. But what caused this collapse? Recent research has revealed a perfect storm of interconnected disasters that brought down one of humanity's greatest civilizations. First came the droughts, not just any droughts, but mega droughts that lasted for decades. Sediment cores from lake beds tell us that between 800 and 1000 CE, the Yucatan experienced the most severe drought in over 7,000 years. Imagine trying to feed a population of millions when it doesn't rain for years at a time. Crops failed, water sources dried up, and people began to starve. But the drought alone didn't doom the Maya. They had survived droughts before. What made this different was what they had done to their environment. Centuries of intensive agriculture and urban expansion had stripped away vast areas of forest. By 800 CE, some regions were almost completely deforested. Without forest cover, soil eroded away with each rain. The land became less able to hold water, making droughts even more devastating. The Maya had created what scientists call a drought amplification system. They had made their own environment more vulnerable to climate change. As crops failed and water became scarce, the complex Maya political system began to crumble. Wars between city-states intensified as they fought over dwindling resources. The elaborate trade networks that had connected Maya cities to each other and to distant lands collapsed. Without trade, the economy imploded. Archaeological evidence shows that in many Maya cities, the elite compounds were abandoned first. suggesting that even the ruling classes couldn't maintain their power in the face of ecological collapse. By 900 CE, cities that had housed hundreds of thousands of people were virtually empty. The jungle began its slow work of reclaiming the monuments to Maya greatness. Now, let's travel thousands of miles and hundreds of years backward in time to a civilization so advanced and so mysterious that we're still struggling to understand who they were and what happened to them. In 1856, British engineers building a railway in colonial India needed ballast for their tracks. They found it in what they thought were ruins of old buildings. What they didn't realize was that they were dismantling bricks from Harappa, one of the world's first planned cities, built over 4,000 years ago. It would be another 70 years before archaeologists understood what had been lost. When they finally excavated properly, they uncovered evidence of a civilization that challenged everything we thought we knew about ancient urban development. The Indus Valley civilization, also called the Harappan civilization, stretched across an area larger than ancient Egypt and Mesopotamia combined. At its peak, it included over 1,000 settlements, from small farming villages to massive cities like Harappa and Mohenjo-Daro. But here's what makes the Harappans truly remarkable. They were master urban planners, 4,000 years before Le Corbusier was even born. Harappan cities were laid out on perfect grid systems, with main streets running north-south and east-west. Every city followed the same plan. It was like they had a master blueprint. The level of standardization is mind-boggling. Bricks were manufactured to exact specifications. The ratio of length to width to height was always 4:2:1 across the entire civilization. They had covered drains running along every street, with manholes for maintenance, a sewage system that wouldn't be seen again until the Roman Empire. And even then, not as sophisticated. Every house had private toilets connected to the municipal drainage system. In 2500 BCE, while most of the world was still using simple pit latrines, the Harappans had flush toilets. They had standardized weights and measures across their entire territory. A weight from Harappa would be exactly the same as one from a city 500 miles away. The Great Bath at Mohenjo-Daro was an engineering marvel, a precisely constructed water tank, sealed with bitumen and surrounded by rooms that may have been used for ritual purification. But perhaps most intriguingly, they developed a writing system that we still cannot read. Over 4,000 inscribed objects have been found, but the Indus script remains one of archaeology's greatest unsolved puzzles. The symbols appear on seals, pottery, and copper tablets. They're clearly systematic, clearly meaningful, but their meaning died with their creators. What we can read are the achievements written in stone and brick. The Harappans were master craftspeople, creating jewelry, sculpture, and pottery that rivals the best work of any ancient civilization. They traded across vast distances. Harappan goods have been found in Mesopotamia, and Mesopotamian goods in Harappan cities. The Harappans seem to have been remarkably peaceful. Unlike other ancient civilizations, we find no evidence of large armies, no weapons of war, no depictions of battles or conquering kings. Their society appears to have been remarkably egalitarian. Houses varied in size, but not drastically. There were no massive palaces or monuments to individual rulers. And then, around 1900 BCE, this remarkable civilization simply ended. Unlike the Maya or the Bronze Age civilizations, there's no evidence of war, invasion, or violent destruction. The Harappans appear to have just walked away from their cities. Some cities show evidence of gradual abandonment over several generations. Others seem to have been left more suddenly, but always peacefully. The quality of urban planning declined in the later phases. Newer buildings were poorly constructed, drainage systems weren't maintained, and the rigid grid system began to break down. What caused this peaceful but complete abandonment? The most compelling theory involves climate change and the shifting of rivers. The Indus River system, that supported millions of people, began to shift eastward. Major rivers dried up, and the monsoon patterns that brought life-giving rain became unreliable. Without reliable water sources, the Harappans couldn't maintain their intensive agriculture. the foundation of their civilization simply disappeared. Evidence from climate science suggests that around 2000 BCE, the region experienced a dramatic weakening of the monsoon system that lasted for several centuries. Unlike the Maya, who fought the environmental collapse, the Harappans seem to have made a collective decision to abandon their urban lifestyle and disperse. Their writing disappeared, their urban planning was forgotten, and their sophisticated technology was lost. It would be thousands of years before anyone would build cities as advanced as theirs. Our final stop takes us to the Mediterranean world of the 13th century BCE, an interconnected civilization that in many ways resembled our modern globalized world. This was the height of the Bronze Age, a time when powerful empires dominated the landscape. The Hittites in Turkey, the Egyptians along the Nile, the Mycenaeans in Greece, and city-states throughout the Levant. These weren't isolated civilizations. They were part of an interconnected world system that archaeologists call the First World Economy. Egyptian pharaohs corresponded regularly with Hittite kings, addressing each other as brother. Mycenaean pottery has been found in Egypt, Cypriot copper in Sardinia, and Baltic amber in Mycenaean tombs. The palace at Pylos in Greece had administrative tablets recording trade in everything from chariots to perfume. This was a sophisticated world of international diplomacy, complex trade relationships, and shared cultural practices. Sound familiar? But this interconnected world also meant that problems in one region could cascade throughout the entire system. And around 1250 BCE, the problems began. The collapse didn't happen overnight. It was a process that unfolded over about 50 years, from roughly 1250 to 1200 BCE. Ugarit, one of the great trading cities on the Syrian coast, was destroyed around 1190 BCE. The destruction was so complete that the city was never rebuilt. The Hittite capital of Hattusa was abandoned around 1200 BCE. This city, which had housed the archives of one of the world's great empires, was left to the wind and weather. In Greece, palace after palace was destroyed. Pylos, Tiryns, Mycenae itself, the legendary city of Agamemnon, all went up in flames. The destruction was so widespread that scholars have identified over 40 major sites that were violently destroyed during this period. But who was responsible for all this destruction? Ancient Egyptian records speak of mysterious invaders they called the Sea Peoples. Egyptian reliefs show Pharaoh Ramesses III fighting desperate battles against these Sea Peoples around 1880 BCE. The Egyptian texts describe them as coming from islands in the midst of the sea and bringing their families with them, suggesting these weren't just raiders, but entire populations on the move. But modern archaeology suggests the Sea Peoples weren't the cause of the collapse, they were a symptom of it. Recent research indicates that the Bronze Age collapse was caused by a combination of factors, all happening at once. Climate change, earthquakes, internal rebellions, and the breakdown of international trade. Paleoclimatic data shows that the eastern Mediterranean experienced severe drought around 1200 BCE, the driest period in over 300 years. At the same time, geological evidence points to a period of intense seismic activity. Major earthquakes struck throughout the eastern Mediterranean. The combination of drought and earthquakes would have been devastating, but the Bronze Age civilizations had survived natural disasters before. What made this different was their interconnectedness. When trade routes became unsafe, the entire economic system collapsed. Without bronze, an alloy of copper and tin from distant lands, these Bronze Age civilizations couldn't maintain their technology or their armies. Archaeological evidence suggests that many of the destroyed cities were burned by their own inhabitants, perhaps in internal rebellions as central authority broke down. The collapse was so complete that writing systems disappeared. Linear B, used by the Mycenaeans, wasn't deciphered until 1952, and only because clay tablets were preserved by the fires that destroyed the palaces. The Hittite cuneiform system vanished completely. Diplomatic correspondence that had flowed between kingdoms for centuries simply stopped. Population levels didn't recover in many areas for centuries. Greece entered what historians call a dark age that lasted 400 years. It would be 400 years before Greeks would again learn to write, 600 years before they would again build cities like those they had lost. Looking at these three collapses, we begin to see a disturbing pattern, a sequence of events that seems to repeat across time and geography. First, there's environmental stress, deforestation for the Maya, river changes for the Harappans, drought and earthquakes for the Bronze Age civilizations. This environmental stress puts pressure on agricultural systems that have been pushed to their limits to support growing populations and complex societies. As resources become scarce, the complex political and economic systems that define these civilizations begin to break down. Social stratification increases as elites try to maintain their lifestyle while common people suffer. This leads to internal conflict and the breakdown of social cohesion. Social stratification increases as elites try to maintain their lifestyle while common people suffer. This leads to internal conflict and the breakdown of social cohesion. Finally, there's a cascade effect. Once one part of the system fails, other parts follow rapidly, leading to total collapse. But here's the crucial point. None of these collapses were inevitable. They were the result of choices. Choices about how to manage resources, how to treat the environment, how to structure society. As we look at these ancient collapses, it's impossible not to see parallels to our own modern world. We live in an interconnected world economy that makes the Bronze Age trade networks look simple. Our cities depend on resources from around the globe, just like the ancient civilizations did. We're altering our environment on a scale that makes Maya deforestation look minor. We're changing our climate faster than any civilization in history. And like the Bronze Age civilizations, our interconnectedness makes us vulnerable. A pandemic can shut down global trade. A cyber attack can disrupt entire economies. Social inequality in many modern nations rivals that of ancient civilizations just before their collapse. But we have something those ancient civilizations didn't: the ability to learn from their mistakes. We can see the patterns, understand the warning signs, and make different choices. It's important to remember that collapse isn't always the end of the story. Civilizations can be remarkably resilient, adapting and rebuilding in new forms. The descendants of the Maya didn't disappear. They adapted, moved to new areas, and survived the colonial period to maintain their culture to this day. The people of the Indus Valley dispersed and likely became part of the broader South Asian population, carrying their knowledge and genes into new contexts. Even after the Bronze Age collapse, the survivors rebuilt. They created new civilizations, the classical Greek city-states, the Phoenician trading empire, the Hebrew kingdoms. But rebuilding took centuries, and much knowledge was lost forever. The question for us is, can we prevent collapse rather than just survive it? The ancient collapses teach us that sustainability isn't just about the environment. It's about creating societies that can adapt to change without losing their core identity. It's about building resilience into our systems rather than pushing them to their breaking point. It's about remembering that no civilization, no matter how advanced, no matter how powerful, is immune to the consequences of its choices. The Maya mastered time, but couldn't master their relationship with their environment. The Harappans built perfect cities, but couldn't adapt when their world changed. The Bronze Age civilizations created a global economy, but made it too fragile to survive shock. We have the knowledge to avoid their mistakes. The question is, do we have the wisdom to use it? These ancient voices, speaking to us through broken pottery and fallen stones, are trying to tell us something important: that civilizations rise and fall not because of fate or divine will, but because of choices. Every choice we make about our environment, our society, our economy, is a choice about our future. The ancients show us both what's possible and what's at stake. Will we learn from their warnings, Or will future archaeologists sift through the ruins of our cities, wondering how we... And if you want to explore more mysteries of the past that hold lessons for our future, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell, because the ancient world has so much more to teach us.